Okay, well, I don't want to waste a minute. We have lots to cover. Um, Thank you all so much for joining us today. It's a huge honor for me to introduce these four trailblazers in tech in honor of Women's History Month. We all know too well that there are not enough women in tech, especially in leadership positions, but that's not what today's discussion is about. I hope that today's discussion helps demystify the pathways that these leaders took and sheds light on advice they have for living with passion and purpose. And I want to thank them for not only being here today, but also for shining a light for me and so many others. So please join me in welcoming Deb Liu, CEO and President of Ancestry and former Vice President at Facebook, Emily White, President at Anthos Capital and former COO at Snapchat, Varsha Rao, CEO of NERC, and Lexi Reese, Executive in Residence at General Catalyst and former COO at Gusto. As one of the things I'm learning from my female mentors is to not waste any words. So I'm going to dive right in with questions. Please mute yourself and type any questions you have in the chat. And here I go. So Emily, Deb, Varsha, Lexi, as a first-time 21-year-old founder, I often experience imposter syndrome. You all took off in your own careers at a very young age, especially in moments when you don't feel equipped to make a decision. How would you advise young women to navigate imposter syndrome?
Who would you like to start with? Should I just jump in?
All right.
Or is that towards Deb?
Yeah, why don't you start, Emily? And I'll go.
Okay, imposter syndrome. God, does it ever really go away? I don't know. So for context, I started out my career at Google back at the beginning of 2001 when there were 200 employees. And I was an art history major and the only non-engineer working on AdWords at the time. And I absolutely had no idea what I was doing. And the phrase "fake it till you make it" came into handy for a long time. I would say the really nice part of tech is that it affords people who have drive and curiosity and the ability to just work hard, the opportunity to advance and move up in an organization because of the fundamental sort of meritocracy that tech has been built on. And it's not that way in all industries, certainly, right? I think we've learned that very clearly from like the, Elizabeth Holmes of the world. In biotech, it's a very different landscape, but in tech, you're actually able to assume pretty powerful positions at relatively young ages if you have the right ingredients of things and have picked the right company. And so what I found myself doing is I was 24 and like everyone else at Google was also 24. So that helped a lot. But I would say my short answer here is that if you really think about it, even if you are the new person in the room, you always have an interesting perspective to share, right? Even being that new pair of fresh eyes on something. And so when getting intimidated, always returning to, I know that there's some positive here that I can bring to the table based on the background that I have, even if it's no background at all. And that propelling me forward into those sort of fake it until you make it situations, which do get easier, but never totally go away, especially if you're continuing to push yourself. So that's my answer.
Well, I thought that when I was in my 20s, I was like, maybe when I'm in my 40s, when I'm a CEO, when I'm on a board, it's going to go away. Well, the answer is it doesn't. So imagine that it's something that you live with, and then you just get to decide what you want to do with it. And as you get more comfortable with yourself, you realize that it kind of sits in the background and it's okay. Because more people feel this way than you think. It is not just women. I think a lot of people feel this way. When you're in school, you can be in the top of your class. There's a class rank, there's a grade, you know where you stand. And when you get out into the world, it is nothing like that at all. Somebody's always better at you on some dimension. And so if you're just going to think, I'm going to be the expert in everything, then you are going to be terrible at everything because you're always going to find someone better than you. So instead, what I have decided was I'm going to be really good at learning the things I really care about. I'm going to be better at adapting. And that has helped me kind of overcome the fact that I'm not going to be the expert ever in most things. I'm not going to be smarter than the engineers at coding. I'm not going to be better than a lot of the product managers I work with. And that's okay. I manage a legal team. I'm not a lawyer. I have no idea what I'm doing. And that's okay as well. And so I think it's one of those things that as you think about your career is to say, you know what, I'm going to be comfortable with this. I'm going to have it in the back of my head, but I'm not going to let it be the thing that defines me. And instead, I'm going to learn faster. I'm going to grow faster. I'm going to adapt faster. And that way you feel like you're taking action as opposed to allowing this to hold you back.
Maybe I'll just jump in and add one more thought. So, I started right out of school at banking, for 2 years and, that whole thing. But I was a founder pretty young at 28, where I started a company in the first .com. And the reason my co-founder and I wanted to go into tech was exactly what Emily said, which was that it was all about what you could do, not who you knew, not, how many years of experience you had. And so I think that that foundational thing gave us a lot of confidence to just plunge in. The other thing I would add is that tech is changing so fast. There's a lot of places where everybody on this Zoom could know a lot more than the people who might have hired you. And so that is actually an advantage. And so the ability to learn and adapt and like lean into the fact that, tech is changing so fast can give you actually a real advantage that I think that gave us confidence. And I guess the last thing I would say is when we founded a company in a space where we were the target audience. And that also really helped. Like no one knew our audience, we believe, better than we did. Certainly not the investors that we were pitching to, not the, sort of the old world that we were trying to disrupt. It was in the cosmetic space. We were young, working women. We wanted to give access to cosmetics to everybody out there. And we were the target demographic. So we could convey that with a level of conviction that I think people found hard to argue with. And so I think that's also something that if it's an area that you're really passionate about or you really understand and you're the target audience, again, you bring a level of knowledge and conviction that other people, are gonna, you don't need to feel like an imposter. You're not an imposter, you know it.
Absolutely. That is the most reassuring for me, having only been a college student and high schooler. So, and I'm going to dive, Lexi, Emily shared that she was an art history major. I know that you started your career off in documentary film. What inspired you to transition into tech and kind of bouncing off this lifelong learning? Clearly, you don't have to feel this institutional knowledge that other industries necessarily require. So I'd love to hear about how kind of your aspirations evolved and that starting point in your journey.
Yeah. Thanks, Audrey. Emily is my inspiration, and that's a true story, but I'll come back to why that is. First of all, I'll pick up on, I'll touch on imposter syndrome also as I tell this story. I feel like I talk to this generation of people coming out of school and they're so planful. They know what they want to be and they say, I want to be a COO. I was like, how do you even know what that means? And I love Curious Cardinals because I think you guys are igniting what really has served me. And it sounds like everybody on the panel just spoke to this. The most is curiosity. Where do you feel like is this intersection of what you're good at, what you're passionate about, and unless you're independently wealthy, what is someone going to pay you to do? Like, that's it. So my career started in documentary filmmaking because I wanted to make a difference in the lives of young girls living in Latin America. And I filmed a story about them. I was a terrible filmmaker, just the fact. I was good at talking to people who we needed to raise money from and tell them the story of people they hadn't seen before. So I started to hone my communication skills. And then I made my way to microfinance because I thought, well, if I can talk to investors about why they should help every entrepreneur, regardless of where they were born, be able to start their business, that will be really good. Well, that was great, but I wasn't particularly good at finance. So then I got some advice, go to a business school, get some hard skills, didn't have friends who had gone to business school, didn't have family who had gone to business school, went there, mind blown, talked about, I didn't even know the word imposter syndrome, but I felt really shitty about myself for much of the time. And a professor there gave me the best definition of imposter syndrome that I've heard, which is when my objective performance is high, but my belief in that is low. And then I said to her, well, what's the difference? What do these other people feel? And she said, I call them the unenlightened, when my performance is low, but I think I'm awesome. I always keep that quote right by me, because I think to Deb's point, you always feel that way. You always feel like a little bit of a fish out of water. But I think if you lean into your curiosity and your passions, you come out the other side. To make a very long story short, how I got into tech was I went into a program at American Express after business school, and we were marketing the product to small and medium businesses. And I saw we were spending more and more money on this thing called AdWords, which at the time no one knew what it was. And I went and scratched and sniffed, and a friend worked there. And true story, Emily was who I interviewed with and became my boss. And she has been such a light in my life for the last, I'm not going to say more than decade though, because she lives this. And when you surround yourself with people who are unafraid to challenge themselves, willing to say when they don't know, and bullshit a little bit when necessary, you know, because you do have to do a little bit of that, but generally just be leaning into learning, that serves you really well.
Thank you so much for that answer. And I so love that connection point. That is so beautiful. I love to hear kind of all of your stories and how you got into this, especially knowing that this audience is a lot of high schoolers who are students at Curious Cardinals and college students who are mentors at Curious Cardinals. So Varsha, I'd like to turn it to you. You have been a CEO in 1998 to now, first a CEO and co-founder of Eve, that beauty e-commerce company you started and sold 2 years later for 110 million, and now as CEO of Nurx, a healthcare company. What advice do you have for women interested in starting or scaling a business today, especially the type of women who are people in general who are thinking, is now my time, whether you're 21 or 28 or whatever age you are, and how much has evolved kind of from your first time around leading a company to now?
Well, it has been a long time. So first of all, it's like almost another lifetime ago that I started that company. I would say that what hasn't changed, I think, for people is that it's always a little bit nerve-wracking to take the helm or start something and break out, because, you know, there's most of the folks here will have alternatives and various sorts. And so you're always sort of trying to evaluate, well, you know, should I do this or do something else? I just really felt at the time that I wanted to be part of a movement, and I felt really emboldened to kind of take the plunge. But I will say, I think naivete, if I'm saying that right, is actually a good thing. Because I think everyone is the more you dig in some ways, and there are, it's challenging no matter what. So I would say, don't worry about your fears. Everyone has fears. If you have conviction about an idea, it's okay to take the plunge and give it a try. And I actually feel like it's even more okay now than it was back when I did it. So I would say, in your 20s is the time to take risks, is maybe how I best position it, whether that's starting a company or going to work for an unknown startup, but it's something you believe in, or, you know, just trying something. Because if you're not going to do it in your 20s, like, when are you going to do it? I think it only gets harder. So I think that's one thing. And then the second thing I would say is, you know, I certainly learned a ton over the 20 years in between. In between that, I actually worked for larger companies. So I ran global operations at Airbnb, and I had some pretty large roles where I honestly learned a ton about culture and mission and leadership. And I would say that today, in terms of being a CEO, is really different than back then. And I think inclusivity, diversity, almost like service, authenticity in who you are is really important. And so in some ways it's easier, I think, if you're willing to actually open yourself up and be that authentic leader. But that does also take a little bit of courage to do that. But once, I do think that's what people want and your teams will expect.
Totally. That's a really awesome thing. And I definitely feel that everyone kind of is able to lean into who they are as a person, is something I have felt personally, which is such a encouraging sentiment. On that note too, of kind of leaning into authenticity, and as it being kind of easier said than done. Deb, I want to turn things to you. I know one of the things I most admire about you is that you are outspoken about the importance of being plain spoken. I'm not going to beat around the bush. This more often than not is a challenge women specifically confront. What advice would you give to the woman in this audience and all people about the value of being plain spoken?
You know, I just think back to this conversation I was having. Somebody on my team was having a one-on-one with me, and she said, you know, I've been on your team for a long time. And I said, yeah. And she said, you know, and I haven't been promoted, and, you know, I feel like I contribute a lot. And she, for 20 minutes, she just kept saying things. And at the end, I was like, are you asking if I'm going to promote you this cycle? And she said, yes. And I said, well, here's what I would say if you were going to ask that question. And I said, why don't you say this with me and let's go back through this conversation. And it was because I said, you know, by you not asking it in a plain spoken way, and I'm in the store, it's going to actually cause, do you think that it's benefiting you or me? And she said, you're right. And we actually practiced it. And then I said, you know, you should ask, like, hey, you know, I'd like to get promoted this cycle. What's the distance between me and what I would need to achieve to get there? And she said, oh, well, I was afraid you're going to say no. And I said, yes, but weren't you also afraid that I didn't actually hear what you said? And I realized that I do this as well. I think a lot of us do this, right? We don't want to hear the no, so we beat around the bush, or we sandwich everything between words instead of just saying the thing. And the kindest thing to do is to actually, it's better to get the no or the not now than it is to not know. And so I asked you to do the kind thing, which is to say, in the most direct way possible, what do you want to know? And what do you know, what is yes, what is no? What's going to get you to yes, what's going to get you to no? Because that's going to get you way more clarity than kind of beating around the bush. I did this a lot earlier in my career. I still do this sometimes. And instead, sometimes I write myself a script to say, these are the 3 points I'm going to make, and I'm going to make them, and then I'm going to finish. And so that's what I think for you, next time you find yourself doing this, take a step back, get your 3 bullet points, and then say it.
Totally. It's so funny. I'll shout her out. My feminist history professor at Stanford, Estelle Friedman, who was the first feminist history professor at Stanford, is here. And when I was in her history class, that was main feedback. What are you trying to say in that sentence? Say it as clearly as you can. And who knew history, Audrey would be able to apply that to being a manager. So thank you, Deb, for sharing that. I'll pivot to Emily. You worked at a lot of big tech companies, what some Stanford students might say are all the dream first jobs out of school: Google, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. When you have all the options to choose from, what do you look for in a company, a culture, a team? What advice would you give to people in the audience about how to approach choosing the right job for it, and even thinking about a job, especially for those who are just graduating and have never even been in a company before?
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to practice the plain speak. So I would say, I believe that people and culture are really everything. So I don't care how good your idea is, if you do not have the right people around the table and a culture that has clear values, and that culture is something that's disseminated across the organization, you're going to have a much harder time getting there. And so of course it's incredibly intimidating when you're young and you're looking at a company, because you're like, who are these people and what is this culture? And I would say a couple of things besides doing your homework and talking to everyone that you can about the company and about the position and what it's like, about, you know, what it really feels like working there, which gives you just a lot of information. Sometimes people don't actually do that work. I really recommend doing that work. I would also think about the 5 reasons why people truly also love their jobs, which are things that you can start to use to hone in on and get a sense of what that company is going to be like to work at. The first one is people who love their jobs love their boss. And what I mean by this is not like, oh my God, I think you're amazing necessarily. It is, I feel like this person supports me. I feel like this person is like, bright and competent and makes good decisions, and that communicates effectively with me and gives me a safe place to fail, right? So that's the first one. How much you get a sense of this in interviews and by talking with other people who like that, who work for that person. Number two is I have a best friend at work. And what I don't mean is like, I literally have a best friend at work. I mean, that could be the case too, but really what this is stand-in for is I feel like this is a place where I can bring my whole self. I don't have to like hide part of who I am, right? Audrey, to your point, I can be my authentic, I can bring my whole self into the workplace. And that's really important, especially now in COVID land, where there's much blurred line between work and home, but also because personally, it's much more fulfilling to work in a place that you feel like believes in you, is supportive of you, and cares about you, and your whole person. Number three, you can see the impact of your job. And this is sometimes, by the way, why it can be harder to work at large companies in some cases, right? There's lots of reasons why it's hard to work at small companies, but one of the reasons can be like, I do this, what's actually happening, right? So are you picking a job where like, if you actually do your job well, you know that you were able to move the needle in another area. Number four, what reason why people love their jobs is there's a path to learning and growing and career advancement, right? So you can see how like, if this goes really well, that opens up the door to more learning, more responsibilities, right? There's that path. Some companies have really great like actual learning and development roadmaps. Others do not, but the great companies have the commonality of there is a path forward and there is a process to learning and growing more. And then the fifth reason why people love their jobs is absolutely the fifth for a reason, and that's compensation. So like, please, no one here take a job because it is the job that pays you 50 grand more than another job. Well, Lexi's right. You have to pay the bills. You have to find a company that will pay you. If those top four things are true, the fifth will come, and is far less important. So anyway, just as a quick guide to like things that you can use to evaluate whether or not you're going to be happy in the whatever short, medium, long-term at companies, that's a quick guide to share.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Lots of other ways we can go, but I want to double down on fifth, which is, even though it's absolutely not the reason that you should take a job, it's still important. And I don't need to kind of dive into, we all are aware of the stats and that a wage gap still exists. I observe this in other capacities personally with regards to how men seem more comfortable than women asking for higher pay. And speaking to women who are generous enough to share their advice with me, they rarely ask to invest or for equity, whereas men more often are comfortable doing so. So what have your experiences as tech execs been like observing gender differences with regards to pay and self-advocacy? And what advice would you give to young women about advocating for themselves, specifically when it comes to pay?
Okay, wait, I'm just going to call out Lexi for a second, because she actually has a really good story around this. Not to out you here, but the one with Tim Armstrong.
You mean when the HR team accidentally forwarded me the pay of those around me, including my male peers, who I found out were making 2 to 5x more than me? That was disappointing. I think that was a true story, and I thought long and hard about how to handle it, and I immediately got a note from HR saying, please delete, please delete. But I had too late. I had printed it out, and I just walked into my boss's office and I printed it out, and I said, I'm sure you'll do the right thing. To Deb's omit needless words point, I think sometimes that's really the most powerful. But how do you avoid getting in that situation? Don't assume anyone cares about this more than you. They don't. Don't assume companies are your friends. Companies are companies, and you are your own advocate. And you will not get it unless you ask for it. And finally, don't ask for something that's not commensurate with the value that you're bringing or the comparables in the market. So I think we're taught at a young age as women not to talk about pay and not to talk about money. And that doesn't serve us. You've got to be able to scratch and sniff. If you don't know, you now have 5 people who could direct you to the general ballpark ranges for technical salaries. And, I think it depends on the context. If you're early in your career, it's not always the case that you have a ton of negotiating power, right? But you won't know until you try. I tried to negotiate my first job out of HBS, and this woman, I'll never forget her, Kathy Taylor, she was like, there's a line out the door of 30 other people who will take this job. If you don't like it, this is what we offer for the job. And there is no room for negotiation. I was like, thank you so much. Let me back up. So sometimes I feel like people read these articles if I have to be my own advocate, and they come in and tell me they want $140,000 and 1 point of equity, and they have not yet merited that, and they lose credibility. So those would be some of my advice. Ask for it, but do your research first, and never hesitate to bring it up, even if people make you feel a little bit like, ooh, that's not nice of you to bring it up.
That's one thing I've seen a lot of recently, which is I did a negotiation seminar, and a bunch of people reached out afterwards, and I've been helping people. And a lot of women say, well, I don't want to be difficult. And I said, it's not difficult to ask for what you deserve. And, there was one woman, I said, look, here's the comps I've seen. I see a lot of the compensation. These are like Google, Facebook, like companies that, I have a sense of the comp. And I said, look, you should ask for what you're worth. And so many, actually one woman wrote back, she goes, I called my mom in India, and she said, if you ask for too much, they're going to rescind the job. And then another woman, she said, my parents are immigrants. She said exactly the same thing. My mom told me if I negotiate, they're going to not give me the offer, or they're going to expect too much from me. And I said, no, you need to do this. And I said, so then my question to them, for both of these women and this woman who was helping her negotiate her startup offer, was, what would a man do in your situation? And they said they would go ask for the money. And I said, why are you not doing it? And each of them did, and each of them got more than 6 figures more. So to be clear, like, you've got to put yourself out there to get what you want. And they got more than 6 figures more in equity. And I just feel like they're now, they would have been making less than their peers, and I knew that, and they did not know that. Oh. And the thing is, this isn't a scalable process. I can't do this for everybody, but it reminds me though, that in this industry that, information is power. So talk to people, get information, ask some people, and don't allow yourself to say, you're going to be difficult, because you know what? It's okay to be difficult if it's going to make you happy and fair.
Oh, that was really powerful. Thank you all for sharing. Yeah, and I hope a lot of the younger girls in the audience hear that and take that with them, and I'll take that with me too. Thank you all.
Audrey, can I say one more thing that I actually think has really helped shift for some people? Because some of this is very cultural, and it's so different depending on what race you are or what your background is, in terms of your real access to feeling like your ability to be assertive. Yeah. And I think something that has helped across races, across socioeconomic intersection, is shift your mindset from you're doing it for yourself to you're doing it for your loved ones and the people that come after you. And get some gumption. You make 60 cents on the dollar to every man for the same job. And that's if you're lucky. In general. If you're Black or Latinx, it's way less than that. So find your overcoming of your probably imposter syndrome or fear, however you can find it. But when you turn your mindset to it's we, not me, that can often help people steel themselves for having what can be difficult conversations.
Thank you. That's a really powerful way to go about thinking about it. And especially if women's strengths are in empathy, an amazing way to kind of reframe that. Kind of on that note, I'm curious, all of you have been in leadership positions. When thinking about, Lexi, what you just said, kind of that some of this is cultural, and whatever your background is, whether that's your gender as a woman or your race or your socioeconomic background, you're familiarized with different levels of assertiveness or advocating for yourself. And even when people think about diversity and equity and inclusion in hiring, that judge people not by where they are, but by how far they've come. So I'm curious how you all go about with that thinking, and what advice you'd give to others who are thinking about how to create the most diverse and equitable workplaces and be empathetic leaders.
Audrey, you want to say that one more time? Like, how do we go about creating representative and inclusive workforces?
I mean, you are all empathetic, or you are empathetic in saying, imagine that other person's perspective or where they're coming from. But if that's not the assumption, if not everyone shares that veil of let me think about where this person has come from and maybe take a chance on them, if depending on their background.
I will, I'll take a swag at this. God, I feel really fortunate in that I've always had a chance to work with really strong, awesome women. And it doesn't mean that it hasn't been hard at times. And I've certainly seen my fair share of women not getting paid as much, or being part of the club that some of the guys who are in leadership are part of. But I really feel like largely I've been really, really supported by awesome women who have paved the way, who have been wind at my back, and who have come after me. It's interesting, when I took made the move into venture, it's another category of jobs that just doesn't happen to have many men. And we now at Anthos are 35 people, half women, including that half a person. No, I'm just kidding. But and quite diverse. And that was intentional for many, many reasons. As you can imagine, you just make better decisions on investments when you have not just obviously gender diversity, but diversity is a value, and you have diversity around the table, because it really does help you with getting to better outcomes. But it wasn't easy to do that, because if we had just gone and hired people from firms, our pool of women would have just been so much smaller, I should say. So what we did is actually we cut the jobs differently than they have existed in venture before. So typically, people who end up in venture or growth investing are really good at negotiating deals. They're really good at diligence and understanding the fundamentals of a business. They're really good board members. And that set of people who are really great at all of those things, it's like a very small set of humans. And again, mostly men. So what we did is we actually split the job into 3 parts. So it's getting on this theme that's kind of come up a couple of times, of this concept of playing to your strengths, right? So instead of saying we need to find people who are great at all of these things, why don't we actually make this a functional organization? And it allows us to bring people in who are going to be great at one of those things and work together as a team. It also has actually allowed us, because of that, to pull people from different backgrounds who were not investors, some who actually are straight out of college, and develop them through those channels, right? And over time, they can take on more responsibility. But it's been a really interesting exercise for us, with diversity in mind, to have a chance to recut how roles have traditionally been defined in order to help bake in more diversity. I have to say, it is absolutely paid off in a number of ways, in part actually just over our overall team satisfaction and happiness. Like, we have a really happy group of people who really love working collaboratively with each other, which is also the environment I like. And our ability to retain those people is really, really high because of that.
It's also redefining what success looks like. So when I first joined Facebook, and Emily joined right around the same time, I think, or right after, there were not that many women PMs. There were 4 women PMs. It was less than 10% of the company. I was pretty shocked, because when I came from PayPal and eBay, it was half women. And I realized it was because there was a computer science degree requirement, and you had to do a technical interview. As many of you know, 20% of computer science degrees at the time, and still today, are earned by women. So you basically cut out a lot of the people. So if you were a woman product manager at any other company and you didn't have a computer science degree and you couldn't pass a technical interview, you literally could not get a job at Facebook. I did not go in as a product manager at Facebook. I went in product marketing. I think, Emily, you went in a different role as well.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't have made it in. And eventually we became product managers, but we kind of snuck in the side door. And then at some point we realized, hey, wait, there were literally 3 women VPs of product, none of whom had a CS degree. And you look around and you think, wait a minute, we have a criteria that's unfair because the women who have succeeded wouldn't have actually ever been hired, but they came in through other roles. And so we unpacked why our process was this way. We took away the computer science degree. We took away the technical interview. We started like broadening the scope of what what backgrounds we could bring in. And suddenly I think we got it up to about a third when I left, but it took years to do this. And we realized that, in our industries, we kind of have this idea of what success looks like, and then we define it, and then we go, okay, those are the only people. And it turns out that that's not what reality is. And so, really unpacking this. So what Emily did in venture was to unpack the reasons why women, if you are looking for people with venture backgrounds, the industry's 10% women. So she starts a firm, it's going to be 10% women because you're hiring people from other firms. So you have to really change the game. And so really kind of unpacking this thing and changing the game by looking at what procedures are actually keeping people out. I would say we had accidentally launched this flow at one of the companies I was at. One person got through the flow out of 10,000 attempts. And so you don't ask, why did that one person get through? You ask why the other people did not make it through. It turns out that there was some quirk in the system that this person snuck through because they had already had a credit card on file. But literally no one else could get through this flow. So I think we just have to unpack things differently. And when you think about your product, when you think about your careers, you think about the opportunities and people who don't make it. Why are those people not making it?
I'm going to maybe add a perspective from a different perspective, which is my 21-year-old self. I went to Penn undergrad, Wharton. It was super competitive. The job that everyone wanted to get back then was investment banking, because I'm a daughter of an immigrant. I will be very open to say I needed to make money. I wanted to make money. And it was also a great learning environment, even though they worked us like crazy. But realistically, it was super competitive. And I didn't necessarily get all the interviews that I wanted. I didn't have the benefit of, a lot of the people at Penn had connections to get great internships over the summer. And I had my dad's past, but he was a stockbroker. And so I got to be his assistant, but it just didn't stack up to all these amazing New York firms that a lot of people worked at. And just, I'm sure you can see the analogy here going forward in tech is probably all those folks who are getting some of these great jobs, some of them maybe through connections, through all sorts of factors. But ultimately, I knew I could do the job and I really wanted it. And so I actually slipped my resume under the door of the interviewer for this really awesome boutique firm. At the time, it was called Wasserstein Perella. It was a breakout firm from First Boston. And the guys, they gave me the interview and I got the job. And so I was the only woman in the analyst class. We were a pretty small, tight-knit group, but I kind of just did it. And it was a little crazy. And when I tell this story, I can't even believe I actually got, I can't believe it all worked out, but it did. And so maybe I would also say, just take the chance on some things that are a little unconventional and it might work out. I also sent a bunch of letters to folks who were alum, and a bunch of that didn't work out. So, you got to be ready for that. But once in a while it works out. And that job gave me incredible experience. Yes, we worked like mad, but I got into HBS because of that probably. And it just set me on a path. Mm-hmm. So luck can also play a role, but you kind of have to, be persistent, I would say.
Yeah. Wow. That's so cool. Thank you for sharing that. A high schooler from New York actually asked to you, Varsha, you mentioned that you did banking for 2 years. Do you think that was helpful before going into tech to teach you necessary skills? And I'll kind of add on to that. A lot of people think certain jobs, certain degrees are kind of prerequisites to other roles or leadership positions. How would you kind of answer that specific question, but think about that conception or misconception, however you want to define it yourselves and at large?
So what I would say is no, first of all. And I have an 18-year-old who's a freshman in college, and I hope he doesn't go into banking because I think the world has changed. But if he wants to go in banking, I will support him, of course. But I don't think you have to do that. I did learn a ton of skills. And so the first, I would say, 2 jobs I had were all about skill building for me. I worked in banking for 2 years. I went to business school, and then I worked at McKinsey for 3 years. And I really still didn't know what I wanted to do, actually, because I was pretty young. I finished all of that by 25. But I just knew I wanted to learn, and I was hungry to learn. And so I think today the equivalent of, those experiences are actually being the product manager at companies. I didn't have that, it didn't exist back then. And, but that's what I would encourage. If you think you want to be in tech, I think the product manager role, from what I see in our company and the companies I've been at like Airbnb, it just gives you a great holistic experience. Mm-hmm. And, even the entry level roles give you a ton of responsibility and analytics combined with cross-functional communication, storytelling, and just, I think, a really great foundation. So I would say no, but I think skills are important. So go to a place where you think you might be able to learn the kinds of skills that will give you the foundation to do whatever you want to do.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that's something we, of course, cover and confront often at Curious Cardinals. I always thought I wanted to make an impact and help individuals. So I thought I was pre-law, and we have all these students who come to us with kind of limited understandings of what's out there for them. So it's really reassuring and inspiring to hear you all confirm that that's not necessary. And there are so many paths to getting where you want to be. So one thing we've talked about a lot that I'd like to ask all of you about is mental health. Mental health is a challenge we all face, and particularly potent, and now even more kind of visibility onto it in light of the pandemic. What are some of the tools in your kit you turn to when you face life's inevitable challenges?
Yeah, this is near and dear to my heart. Just seeing the stress and strain that my kids, who are of privilege and have had, a relatively okay experience during this pandemic, and seeing at 12 and 9, and by the way, this is part of the way we found Curious Cardinals, because we wanted them to see mentors that told them, like, it's going to be okay. You don't have to be perfect in every way, but somehow for them, the performance anxiety of they need to do well has seeped into their bones. But obviously this seeps into people's bones in lots of different ways and flavors. I think it's really important, and there was an article in the New York Times by the health writer there who said in 25 years of writing about physical, mental health, and wellness, it comes down to 4 things: move, nourish, reflect, and connect. So keep your body healthy and moving, nourish your body in healthy and good ways, find time to reflect that is not doing, the idea of the busy mind, it can catch up with you. So just reflect and then connect, have a community with people that and that love you, and you don't put all of that, which is really, really a danger zone for folks who go into tech and get on this high octane treadmill. If you put all of that to the side and you say, all I'm going to do is work, or if you're in school and you say, all I'm going to do is be the best student that I'm going to be, it does catch up with you. And I think that's where the stress and strain, outside of some of us have chemical predispositions for different mental health stuff. Yeah. But by using this move, nourish, reflect, and connect with my kids now and with ourselves, and feeling like, can I look back on my day and look forward to the next day and see where those things are happening? And it's okay if maybe one day, maybe 2 days go by and you don't see that, but you can't go more than that without you're almost taking out more from the bank of your health and wellness that will catch up.
Yeah, when you said reflect, that find time to reflect, that's not doing that resonated. My runs are my precious time, and I would listen to the New York Times daily and was like, I gotta just think in this time. But I'm curious, I think it can feel that people kind of have a breaking point before they kind of develop that toolkit. So I'm not sure if any of you have a moment like that you encountered, or how you would think of even being preventative or proactive when the sun is shining in regards to mental health, as well as what, in addition to what Lexi shared.
One of the biggest challenges we're facing right now is burnout. Like the temptation to kind of just be on Zoom all the time, to try to do everything that we couldn't do over the last 2 years. Like it's like a treadmill, and you don't realize that you're exhausted until you get off, but you're not getting off. And so I've seen this in people on my team. My coach pointed out to me, like she said, you are completely burnt out. Just talking to you, I can tell you need to take some time off. And you don't know until you reach a breaking point, and that's not where you need to be. And so what you need to do is like your weight, or, like other things, there's just no way to check in, like, get your blood test or with burnout. And so, because you're like a frog boiling in water, you just don't feel it until it like kills you. And so one of the things you need to do is have check-ins with yourself, or have somebody you're accountable to. So for me, as my career coach, who just said, hey, I see these signs in you. Here's 3 ways I can notice in you. This is what you're saying. I'm reflecting it on you. You need to fix this. I did this with someone on my team. I actually asked her to leave my team because we were a high priority, high visibility project, and she was miserable. She hated doing executive review. She hated all the things. It was like selling the project, getting resources. And she went to kind of a lower visibility team and just thrived there. But I had to ask her to leave and then 6 months later, and we were friends before, it was very messy. 6 months later, she said, thank you. I was really burnt out and I didn't see it. But it was really hard for me to do that because I couldn't articulate to her that I could see it in her, and she couldn't see it. And it took us a long time, and we're friends again, but it was hard, right? Because you can see something in someone else you can't see in yourself. So find a way to have someone else hold a mirror to you if that's what you need. And whether that's accountability from someone you trust, or whether it's a coach, or someone who's your mentor, that's incredibly important.
One of the things I might just add is that what I think is very inspiring to see is that the stigma around mental health has really started to just fall dramatically. And I am so inspired by people of the generation on this Zoom, and the openness around people, our willingness to talk about things in a way that I think, I'm sure I suffered from elements of anxiety and depression in my 30s and 40s, and I just couldn't put a name on it. And I felt like I couldn't talk about it. And I would just encourage, it's one of the things we really like to focus on at Nurex, which is, there's so much areas of healthcare that are stigmatized that shouldn't be. And the stigmas, our goal is to reduce stigma around these areas. And so know that you're not alone. If you're feeling in a certain way, there are probably 50% of people around you that are probably feeling the same way. And I love the idea of having someone that you can check in with, whether it's a mentor, a teacher, your parents. I mean, your parents will care about you deeply, and they know you from a long time. They probably can sense when things are changing. And so be open around how you're feeling, because that's how you can get support. Sorry, Emily, I didn't mean to.
No, I thought that was so good. I also just like hearing you talk. You're very calming, very calming presence. I love all of this. And so the only one thing I was going to add is, and this is going to sound, it's going to sound cheesy and maybe a little Pollyanna-ish, but it's really a tool that has helped me, is, it's first of all, life is not perfection. Like it's not possible. You are absolutely going to hit shit shows, shit storms, bad moments in your life. And on a daily basis, stuff goes wrong. And so building resilience is it's something that like people who have resilience just go a lot farther and typically have more fun doing it. And so that's always sort of been a goal of mine. It's like, when you get hit, like, how are you going to come out of that? Right? Like, this can be professionally, it can be personally. I've shared with some of you, you guys know that I had breast cancer 5 years ago and had to go through chemo and surgery. And I was 37 and I was like, how is this happening? And I came out of that experience stronger. And the reason is because every time something goes wrong, whether I could directly impact it or not, the thing that I first ask myself is, or I say is like, every flaw is a gift. Every flaw is a gift. This is a gift. What am I going to do differently now that I have revealed and found this gift? Right? Is it, I'm going to like leave earlier, you know, so that I don't hit traffic, so I'm not late for the next meeting? Is it that I'm going to communicate my needs differently? Is it that I'm going to reprioritize? Is that I'm going to go seek help? But just being able to turn the misery of, oh my God, something didn't go right, into an action-oriented mindset and approach has been really, really helpful in those tight times. And they just exist for all of us. So
Thank you. Okay, I have two final questions that I want to hear everyone's answers to. One is, there's a lot of talk about the necessity for women to compete with each other. And it's so clear on this call, you are all just uplifting each other and little comments here and there, which I love to see so much and is so awesome. I'd rather ask you all, how can women best support each other?
Also, I recently wrote a book. It's coming out in August, and I had to add in the chapter about 4 types of allies a note on queen bee syndrome, because it pisses me off when people talk about queen bee syndrome. There is no such thing as women tearing each other down as a practice that is not done by men. Queen bee syndrome only exists in organizations where there's only one spot for a woman, so they have to compete for it. It is not a typical thing, and it is actually created by artificial circumstances. Women lift each other up, and I have seen, like, I am only where I am because there have been incredible mentors, men and women, who have given me so much support for my career, and I pay that forward. I see that in the women here, and so it bothers me a ton when people say that. But I actually think that, you know, allies are incredibly important, and having allies in both men and women and supporting each other, because, you know, there are not a lot of women founders, not a lot of women in tech in the C-suite. There are not a lot of women investors. And so if we're not supporting each other, if we're not helping one another, like, we're doing this all wrong. And so I think we should, you know, and a lot of those stories are actually really toxic, because it's something which is, look, there's normal competition between men and women and amongst men too, but they name it something when it's women, because of course. And so I just want to make a note of that for all of you, because these are incredible women, and you can see the kind of level of support Emily and Lexi have for each other. And I worked with Emily, and she's been incredibly supportive. And so, you know, I'm meeting with Marcia later this week to talk about her company. So, you know, these are the kinds of things where I think we should be supporting each other, and we will be.
Love that so much.
I might just add on that. I think I'm really inspired by this quote: "Until we're all free, we are none of us free." Emma Lazarus. And I think white supremacy, white patriarchy in particular, really drills into the notion of those who have been left out of systems of power, that we are lucky to be there, and it's a zero-sum game. And it takes some active rewiring of the brain of, no, we're optimizing not just for us as individuals, but us as a society, and that we don't have there's only zero sum. We can have a collectivist view. And so I think that it's incumbent on everybody to not just think women who have gotten to the table, how do I get other women to the table? It's how do I get people of race and its intersections of all types to this table? Why? Not because it's only the right thing to do, but because of all the reasons that Deb talked about earlier. You make better products, you make better services, you make better businesses decisions. And I think that as soon as you find yourself because I do think that people set up the dynamic. There's nothing more unappealing but more gossipy than two executive women when there are only two on the team being in a fight with each other. So you just have to avoid it at all costs and sort of say, hey, we're making this table bigger for a lot more people, not just ourselves.
I'll add on.
You know
to
what's really funny? I'll just say, oh, go. I'm so sorry, Emily. Go ahead. No. Go, you go.
Okay. So I'll just add, I so agree with everything that's been said. I just kept coming back to this, like, one thing that you don't see when you're young is like, obviously you don't have the perspective of what it's like to have worked for 20, 30 years. But one thing that's very true is that you plant a lot of seeds when you're younger in your career, and you get a chance to reap those when you're older. And, you know, even the friendship with Lexi, for example, is something, you see that we planted a long time ago, and we've stayed in each other's lives, and we've grown together. I think, you know, there's something about just like living your values, right? Like if you really care about being in an environment where like diverse people and women are attracted to you, are on your teams, like live those values and create them momentum, right? You don't always have to wait for someone else. Whether it's, I'm just thinking about like, even in Silicon Valley, how much women help each other, right? I mean, I'm thinking about, I started with some friends, this like women in tech holiday party. It's like 250 women, it has to be paused over COVID, but like, it's just badass women getting together once a year for no other reason than to enjoy each other and say hello over the holidays, or, going out of my way to help a president who was coming in, a female president who was coming into one of our portfolio companies, negotiate her comp package to make sure it was like really badass. So I think there's just something about just like rolling your sleeves up and like taking the time and putting your time where your values are. And that momentum, it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy. And like, sometimes you feel like you're planting those seeds, you've planted, but I promise you, when you start getting to that behavior, it really is, it just grows, the momentum grows, and you'll be able to lean on it for a lifetime. And sorry, Varsha, it's all you.
No, I was just thinking that in this new company I've been at for the last 3 years, Nurex, which is female focused healthcare, none of these conversations ever come up anymore because our leadership team is like over 50% female. We serve, our mission is around making healthcare accessible. We've focused on contraception, PrEP for HIV, like really stigmatized areas of care. And so we've also served gay populations, trans populations, certainly like Black, Hispanic, so we're quite diverse from all dimensions. And it's funny because I suddenly feel just really authentic. I'm a female, I'm brown, I'm not Black, I'm, I don't know where I fit in, I'm just me. But suddenly these conversations around like the queen bee and like none of that is part of the ethos at all. So I think also finding a company where, you're seeing reflected in the interview process and the people that you're meeting and your manager, some elements of the environment you want to be in, I think also helps alleviate that. It's not perfect because not all companies are there yet, of course. But I do think things can evolve in a very positive way as we get more people at the table.
Okay, I want to end quickly because there is nothing worse that I can do than going over 4 busy executives' time. But final question, imagine 20-year-old Deb, Varsha, Lexi, and Emily. What advice would you give to her, your younger self?
I'll jump in. Listen to your whispers. If you don't, they will become screams before you know it. And gut instincts are really powerful. I wish I had listened to mine a lot more actively when I was younger.
Always be learning, because if you're learning, you're always growing. And if you're always growing, you're going to get to where you want to go.
I would just say to be a little bit more patient and to remember there's like a lot of chapters and sub-chapters and paragraphs even. And so one thing doesn't work out, there's like the next chapter or the next like 6 months even. So there's so many different opportunities. So, try things.
Oh my gosh, it's hard to go last after these guys. I think it's do more of what scares you than what you should do. And it's easy to listen to the shoulds. And there's always, I should go back to business school. I should go to banking. I should do this. And then lo and behold, you find you've gone 20 years doing everything someone thought you should do, and you can't even find the voice that says, what do I want to do? So hear that voice.
Thank you all so much. I can't even begin to express my inexplicable gratitude for all that you shared and for your time and my inspiration, because this is all advice for me too. So I feel so grateful. Thank you all so much for sharing this with our community. I hope Curious Cardinals can be a place for students to continue aspiring for their greatest dreams and see you all as beacons of inspiration, of living lives of fulfillment and impact as you all do so beautifully. So thank you so much.
Can I do a commercial for you, Audrey?
I won't say yes.
So Curious Cardinals is a growing business that Audrey listened to her whisper and her voice, and she challenged herself to be brave. And she and her team, that's amazing, has started this. And the lifeblood of any company is great talent. So they need great talent and they need great customers. So if everybody tweeted this out and said, hey, I learned something tonight, check out Curious Cardinals, let your kids be curious too, that would help them and get 5 new people to sign up for Curious Cardinals. Thumbs up if you can commit to that. And if you're a person in school, be a mentor or find 5 more mentors for them. Thumbs up.
Thanks.
Love it.
Thank you, Lexi.
Okay, not everybody fully committed, but we got at least 8, so 40 more customers.
Yay.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Enjoy your evening.
Thank you.
Bye.